Hi, everybody. So welcome to this screening. I wanted to say a few words about Rossella Schillaci, the filmmaker who made this film, then allow her to say a couple of words about it. But I wanted just to introduce her and say why she's here and why we're looking at this film. Every year we have the opportunity to invite an artist in residence to spend 7 weeks here, usually in the spring semester. In the past 6 years, is that right? We've had 3 writers and now 2 filmmakers. And normally they teach a course to graduate students, a short course. And this semester, Rossella is teaching a course about ethnographic documentary, which is what she does, mainly. I don't really want to give you her whole CV, just to say that she's describes herself as a visual anthropologist. She bases her films mainly, not this film, which is unusual in her canon, but most of her films on in-depth anthropological research using cutting-edge audiovisual methodologies. Her most recent film, I think, is right, is the one made in VR 360, a film called Affiorare, which is made with a virtual, you watch it with a virtual reality headset, 360 degrees, and it's shot in a prison in Torino, which is her hometown, and it's about a law in Italy that allows mothers to keep their young children with them in jail until I think they reach the age of 3, is that right?
No, it's 10.
Oh, it's 10, right. It used to be much younger, yeah, anyway. And she made a longer film on this subject called Ninna Nanna Prigioniera, in English translation, Prison Lullaby, about a woman who's incarcerated in Torino with 2 young children. It's a very moving film, very, very powerful. So I'll let you say a little bit about that. I won't go through your awards and things, but I would like to say that, I mean, she's a much prized filmmaker. I'm very excited to have her here, and I think it's great that she's teaching a course to our students who I'm sure appreciate this opportunity. I wanted to say a word about the context of the film itself, and then I'll hand over to Rossella. The film runs 1 hour, 17 minutes. It's not quite feature length, a little bit shorter. And it's about women who took part in the Italian resistance and then the aftermath of that. So what happens in the years after 1945, after the liberation, up until the mid-50s, I would say. That's the time frame of the film. And for those who know this history, the next minute is going to be superfluous. But I think I want to say this just in case people don't know what happened in Italy in that period. So on September 8th, 1943, Italy signs a separate armistice with the Allies, so with the United States, Britain, troops then kind of land in southern Italy and start moving upwards. North and central Italy is occupied by the German army, and then also by what remains of the fascist system, which is kind of reconstituted at the end of September 1943. So between September 43 and April 45, April 25th, we're just about to have that date, which is the date of the liberation officially, a civil war is being fought in Italy, a war between partisans who are anti-fascist volunteers, some of them people from the army, other just normally civilians who've taken up arms. And in this fight, quite a large number of women are involved. And their story has not been told as systematically as the story of men, even though there have been several accounts of women partisans and their activism going back to oral testimonies, other films. But this is not has been a mainstream piece of history. A recent book came out by Benedetta Tobaggi last year about women in the resistance. So this is being covered as we run up to the 80th anniversary of the liberation next year. But it's still, I think, I would say, a more marginalized piece of history. After the liberation, April 45, women then start to want to participate in the political process. For the first time, they get the vote. The first time they vote is June the 2nd, 1946, where they vote both on what institution Italy is going to have, whether it's going to continue to have a monarchy or have a republic. The republic wins by a fairly small margin. The king goes into exile, and that's the end of the monarchy. And they also vote to elect the Constituent Assembly, which is the first kind of pre-parliament whose job is to frame the constitution of the Republic in Italy. And that takes place between June 46 and the end of 47. The constitution comes into force beginning of 48, and you get the new system. One thing I think the film mentions is the participation of women in these things called the Gruppi di Difesa della Donna, groups for the defense of women, which formed during the resistance, and they advocate for women's rights, equal pay for women, for equal work, women's suffrage, and so on. And also the emergence of a kind of women's movement. A magazine called Noi Donne, We Women, starts coming out also during the resistance. So the film tracks these changes, and it ends with somewhere in the mid-50s when some of the demands that women made during the resistance hadn't been satisfied. In those first elections of June 2nd, 1946, I think 49 women were elected to Parliament, which is about 5% of Parliament, a very small number. When you get to 2018, it was over 300 women. However, the kind of colour of politics changes, as you know, since then. But there's obviously been a much increased participation of women much more recently than in the early post-war years. So that's the time frame of the film. I hope that gives you a bit of context if you didn't know it. I'll pass over to Rossella, and then after the screening we're going to have like a short discussion, Q&A from the audience, so I'll leave it to Rossella to introduce the film.
Thank you. I mainly want to thank you, David, all the professors, the scholars, the students here in Casa Italiana. I'm really learning a lot from all of you. For me it's really a unique experience. I'm very happy to screen this film here, because usually during these days that are around the 25th of April, so around la festa della liberazione, la giornata della liberazione anche, I'm screening this in Italy, in school, or in cinema. I'm so proud and so honored that I could edit, I could work with the voices of these women. That really surprised me for the level of their deep thoughts, but also for their irony and the sense of humor. And I'm very happy that the film is shown here. And of course, I'm here later for any questions.
Thank you. Thanks. Good to see you. So, thank you. That's a very powerful film. And it's kind of a very sad film, because it's a film about loss, really, at the end, the loss of that kind of impetus and those hopes of the resistance. I mean, one could tell the story in a different way. There is, you know, a story of things that women gained, and, you know, some of the presence of women in Parliament in the 50s leads to some of the reforms of the 60s. But, you know, I think that story of that subjective experience of having lost a lot of what they wanted in the resistance is true, and it's very powerfully done. I wanted to ask a little bit about this in relation to your other film work, because it's a very different kind of film for anybody who's seen any of Rossella's other films, ethnographic films. This is unusual in a number of ways. I mean, your other films you shoot in, you know, in real locations with real people. You work with them over a long period. You get trust and so on. They're much more kind of ethnographic films. This is a film made up entirely of film footage, photographs, and audio recordings, and then of course there's those parts where you film the process of collecting things in the archive, which is, I suppose, the contemporary bit of it. But it's unusual in that it's made up of this other material. Your other films have no non-diegetic music. This has music all the way through. And I just wondered how far these changes of theme and style from your other work were affected by the fact that this was a collaboration. This film was made in collaboration with the production of the Archivio Nazionale Cinematografico della Resistenza, who provided a lot of the film. There's other archives you used. How did that collaboration work, and how far did it shape the kind of film that you made, and how much agency did you have to make the film you wanted to make? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to still be here and listen to us and watch the film. Thanks for the question. For me, it's the first time that I started a project not for my desire, not for my research, but somebody else proposed me. So in this case, actually after the screening of Nina Nanna Prigioniera, the director of the Archivio Cinematografico della Resistenza, came to me and said, look, I have a dozen and dozen of interviews made by us, by the archivist, since the 50s till now. And I really would like to do something with that. Can you think about something? Can you think to do a film, a documentary film, using our interview? And I was scared, I have to say, because lots of films have already been made about resistance. This interview actually were already used by other films. And she told me, look, I gave this interview, but I really would like something only about women with the women perspective. And for me, as you said, there was a challenge because I never made before archival film. As you said, usually I prefer to observe, I'm visual anthropology, but experiment, but never done this. But then I started to listen to this interview and really was admire some interviews, some people, all the women, you see the name at the end are all the women that are being interviewed. Some of the women have been interviewed by different persons in different years. And I found I really had a difficult time to select because they are really saying so important things, as you said, also about disillusion, lost, but also things that they gained. Because one thing that nowadays, fortunately, we know, but when I started this project was more than 10 years ago. We started around 2014, and we made research for several years before finishing. At that time, there was still the idea of women in resistance as wife or partisan or mothers. But actually, most of them were not even women. They were just girls of 13, 14, 15 years old. And this, for me, was strange. I didn't know that. I learned from their interview. I learned how much they fight against fascists, they fight against Nazis, but they fight for themselves because they want the opportunity to work, to have the same job as men, and to be paid as men. And at that time was kind of important. And in a way, I start to listen to them, and I use the same method that I use usually. So try to edit, to do a film from the point of view of the participants. And I try to do the same with them. I try to tell a choral story, because there are many, and try to respect their point of view, respect what they were telling to me, but in a very personal way. I try to think what was resonating to me and to the present also. How important were the things that we're saying for our present. And as you said, I was not alone, fortunately, because I couldn't do that alone. So with me work Paolo Olivetti, the director, several archivists, several historians, because we really need to look for a lot of visual material. And it was strange because sometimes, especially in the 60mm films, when a woman appears, the camera strangely moves. and we had really to slow down to see that, like, coming down from the mountains, there is also a woman. So women were not visually represented. We really had to research a lot. And I really have to thank all the archivists. For example, like after 2 years, I think already, from a very small archive of Biella, arrived this picture that were colored, the few colored pictures for that time, and are the one that we were colored but not so well. So in the editing we adjusted. Yeah. But I was shocked because in that picture you can see that are children. They are so young. And I never saw that images before. Yeah. And so all the process was, yes, a lot of research, a lot of negotiation, also for how, because of course it's not a historical film, so the visual doesn't respect all the time. I tried to build an atmosphere. So was a lot of negotiation about what we could use, what we couldn't use, how, between all of us, also for the duration.
I wanted to say, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating for me because I've recognized a lot of the bits of film you use, some of them being used before. What I've found very powerful were, for instance, the shots of soup kitchens, these very hungry children being fed. You really get that sense of the hardship of living through the war in this film. Other things are clearly faked. I mean, some of these films of partisans fighting, the bit where where she, the staffetta goes to get these men coming out of a wall, are all reconstructed. And after the liberation, they made these kind of semi-fictional reconstructions of heroic partisans, and they're all about men, really. Very few women doing anything active. I wanted to ask about that. She's just my second question. I think we should open it up. Is about one of the things I found very interesting and unusual in this film is this repeated reflection on the process of collecting the material. So there's lots of shots of hands switching on a tape recorder or threading something onto an editing table, cameras whirring and things, so that you get that sense of the kind of material reality of the document that you're putting together. And I think that's interesting because it's not a conventional documentary. I mean, and I think I see in some ways this links up with that kind of avant-garde tradition of doing a reflexive, going back to Vertov Man with a movie camera, where you're kind of constantly seeing the camera and the material. So, there is that element of the film reflecting on the process of making the film, which I find exciting. Could you say something about that and why you chose to give so much space to those shots of
Actually,
archive?
for me, more than the process of making the film was the process of making the research. So I really wanted to document all the research we made to find visual material. So, of course, started from 16 millimeters films, Super 8, but then we research everything, like all the i vetrini, le diapositive, don't know how to say in English.
What, the glass slides?
The gloss slides,
yeah.
or the poster, manifestos, or even the fotoromanzi.
Yeah, fotoromanzi.
Even fotoromanzi. We look at every object, every ID card, everything that could help us to show the female in the resistance. And then, while I was doing that, we were discovering material, we were discovering treasure, but I don't know how to say, also not well conserved. I mean, these glass were in a mansarda?
Yeah, like a roof.
In a roof,
attic, yeah.
In a old archive, because these archives don't have any more money. They don't have public funding, so they are not able to conserve and to preserve their material. So I thought it could be a good idea to have the archive, I'm speaking about very small archives. These small archives are a character. So I wanted to tell the story also of this archive, and of course, the journey we made in these archives.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think time now for some questions from the audience. Have you got a mic to hand around? So if you want to intervene, can you just put your hand up and you'll get a microphone. Yeah.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I was struck by a number of particular images of the women. I was just wondering, because the Spanish Civil War was one of the first historical instances in which women were really comrades, particularly in the West, and especially sartorially, wearing the tuta, basically. I was just wondering if we know if there were any images of women in the Spanish Civil War that circulated back in Italy. I mean, I assume not. But was there any sort of consciousness of the Spanish Civil War as a precedent in which women sort of achieved that kind of equality, both on the front, but also just as socially, maybe, or is that perhaps just a?
I have to say that I'm not an historian. I'm a filmmaker. I'm visual anthropologist, so I haven't done. But I'm telling you, the archive where I work, that produced the film, as something, and what we knew that who created the archive is Piero Gobetti, that is the son of Paolo and Ada Gobetti, and they already started the action rights a long time before the beginning of resistance, and they for what I know, they collaborated, but I can be precise.
Paolo, the son of Piero.
Paolo is the first who created the archive, is the son of Piero.
Yeah. Other questions?
Good evening. You kind of answered my first question about the funding for the archives. I was curious how well those are maintained, but that leads to my second question, which is, it's my understanding that in the current political climate in Italy that the sort of the rehabilitation of the fascist point of view, if you will, like celebrating the dead of both sides in a different way, if that's something that you think threatens the maintenance of the partisan story in the current climate. Like, in other words, like they said right after the war they were disappointed that everyone called them, ladri or whatever, and then they sort of rehabilitated throughout history. But now, is there a sense that could go strongly the other way at any point? I don't know, that's not a historical question, but it's not necessarily an anthropological film question either, so I understand if you know.
The answer is yes. Yeah, I mean, you'll
They are
just see what
destroying
happens.
everything. Yeah.
Just see what happens next year with the 80th anniversary. It's going to be really problematic. And, you've got to now, the people who want to defend the resistance legacy have got to really do that in a way they never had to do before. You want to say something about that? Or, I mean, we're living through bad times.
And I think the roots are in what one Joyce Lusso actually said that fashion never died. They never tried to completely destroy fascists. And that's the problem we have nowadays for that, simply.
Other questions? I think there's time for a couple more. If anybody wants to put their hand up.
I wanted to add that it feels like the archive itself is like its own resistance, like it's fighting to stay alive. And then my question was why you think there was so much, la parola che ho è disprezzo, like disdain for the partisans after the war, after they're liberated, like why they're not seen as an instrument of the liberation.
I mean, there's one of the answers in the film itself, that woman who says that they gave jobs to the former fascists because the partisans were seen as revolutionary and therefore they couldn't be trusted. So that's that big, sense that the partisans wanted a radical transformation. They weren't safe people to hire. There is another level, which is, among the peasants and people in rural communities, there was a lot of distrust of the partisans because they thought they were going to bring reprisals and violence. That's been well documented. So there's a real ambivalence in some of the population towards the partisan struggle, even at the time. That's one level of it, anyway. And the other is, this restoration, this continuity of the state. That the old personnel went back into positions in the judiciary, in the media, in other areas of society. That happened very quickly afterwards.
My question refers to what I understand, that after the war in Italy there was a strong communist movement, and that does not come out in the movie at all. Why not? Or does it not? Were the women particularly not involved in that? Or it seems there was something missing.
The communists?
I
didn't get it.
Do you want to say that? Yeah, he's saying the sense of the presence of the communists that was very strong at the time doesn't seem to come across in the film.
Right.
Yeah, I think it does, but perhaps you want to say something about that.
No, I think, there are even scenes shot in PC Communist Party. There are, but I didn't want, since the women interviewed were belonging to different parties. There were also Catholics. I didn't want to focus in one party or the other. I think, as the women say, they were coming from all the parties, so I didn't want to focalize. It's not the topic of the film. It's mainly the participation of women, and women were coming from different political parties.
But the film does show these gruppi di difesa della donna being formed. It shows Noi Donne. All these things were around in the area of the Communist Party. So that whole movement for women's suffrage and for equal pay for equal work was being driven by the Communist Party. And I think the film shows that fairly well.
I don't know that this is a question, but my grandmother worked with the resistance in the hill town outside of Asti. And then I had men in the family in Torino. But I do know when my grandmother came here in the 1950s, she was blacklisted because they felt there was a connection with her and the Communist Party. And she was never a member of the Communist Party, but because of her work with the resistance, she was almost deported. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you had to, when you applied to get a visa to come to the US, you had to say you have never been a member of the Communist Party, and that was still a requirement until recently. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, you still have to sign the, you're not a communist.
Yeah. There aren't many left, unfortunately.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to your second question at the very beginning. You asked for the musical choices. If you can tell us more about it.
The music, sorry?
Yeah. The musical, the songs, like the choice.
Okay, that is a difficult part because really it's, I think, the first film that I do with music. And I was terrorized, really terrorized, you can say, because so at some point enter in the production the distributor, that is Lab 80 Film, that is a very important, small, independent distributor, but very powerful. They have a very good network of independent film all over Italy. And every year they organize screening of this film. And we didn't have a lot of funding. We just local funding, so we were missing a part for the post-production. And the distributor say, okay, we will put some money. We have, I can propose, I really knew that I wanted music, because also, I don't know if you realize, but practically all the material, apart from some from Istituto Luce, all the rest is mute. There is no sound.
And well, you dubbed on sound effects.
We recreate the sound with the sound engineer. So it's really a huge work. Recreating the sound of this material was huge. And still was missing. I really thought I need music to glow together everything, and also convey. I really wanted to recreate the atmosphere, not only of the place, but also the feeling. Women are speaking a lot of their feelings, fears, courage, enthusiasm, when they say such incredible thing, no? With a motivated life or whatever. So I wanted, with the music, to kind of give a sense of this feeling. So the distributor proposed us Giorgio Canali. I don't know if you know, he's a very famous guitarist from the group CCCP and other. It's very rock. And I knew that I want guitar and I want rock music. This I knew. So they told me, look, we work with this musician. If you want, you can work with him. I said, oh, I can speak with Giorgio Canali. I don't know really how to communicate. How can say to Giorgio Canali? For me, it was a big name. Me, Rossella, con Giorgio Canali. So was hard. The editor helped me a lot. So we kind of built. We already knew which scene had to have the music. And we send to him some rough cut. And then I try to explain with my words, look, here I'd like music, like the Liberation Day. I wanted something that could go in contrast. Because what they say then, the topic is disillusion. So I didn't want to be also very, rhetoric, didactic. So having usually in this kind of film there is Bella Ciao. So I say, no, Bella Ciao, please.
Good choice not to have it. But you do have that song at the end, that lovely song that Milva sings.
Milva, it's so beautiful, the song. I really love that. And Milva gave her for free. Milva, I don't remember son or daughter. Yeah. So I try to say, here I'd like something in contrast, here I would like something very fast, or really with my few words. And then I found incredible his work. He really worked very fast, and he already sent me the piece with his music behind, so I could see. And it was incredibly easy. I'm really glad for that.
Good. I think we're actually out of time, but maybe is there one more question you want to get in? And I think we'll have to be the last one. Thank you.
I think this is a quick question. I'm just wondering if there was a geographic focus in the film on Piedmont and the reason for that, because I don't know enough about like the history of, where the partisans were, if they were, in all different parts of the country.
Actually, is for a very practical reason also, because the archive that produced the film is from Turin. And he had lots of contact with this small archive in Piemonte, like Novara, Biella. So is where mainly the material come from. But then we had Amod from Rome that gave also materials. But the interview, because most, unfortunately, only few women were still alive when I started the project. And I interviewed them. It's very, very two or three. All the others were already dead. And that were the interview that the archive had. So the archivist mainly interview people in the north of Italy. So it's just a practical reason.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rossella.
Thank you.